spot on and authentic.
What do you think the biggest challenge was? Is it the singing, or is there certain characteristic to...
Lisa Marie Presley's private investigator just dropped a report claiming Elvis hid secret messages in his song lyrics. Fans are stunned. Could these codes reveal hidden truths about the king's life? What did Elvis really mean in his songs? Could we finally decode his secrets? Join us as we uncover the hidden messages in Elvis music. The woman who searched for her father's secrets. Lisa Marie had always been a quiet soul, the kind of person who carried weight without complaint. She possessed her father's piercing blue eyes, but hers held something different, a gentle sadness mixed with fierce determination. Those who knew her spoke of her kindness first, how she'd remember small details about people's lives and ask about them months later. She loved fiercely, protected those she cared about with unwavering loyalty, and beneath her soft-spoken exterior lived a woman who refused to let unanswered questions steal her peace. Graceland had become her cathedral of ghosts. The mansion sprawled before her each evening, like a monument to memory itself, its white columns gleaming under the Tennessee moonlight. She would walk those hallways when sleep refused to come, her footsteps echoing against marble floors that had known her father's stride. The weight pressed down on her shoulders during these nocturnal wanderings. Not just grief, but something heavier, something unfinished. The shadows seemed to gather in corners with purpose, as though they had stories to tell but lacked the voice to speak them. Sometimes she'd pause outside the music room, and in the silence between her heartbeats, she swore she could hear the faintest melody drifting through the walls. Old recordings playing from nowhere. Her father's voice, smooth and haunting, seemed to whisper through the house like smoke. Lisa Marie had spent years dismissing the conspiracy theories, the wild claims, the people who insisted her father had left hidden meanings in everything he touched. She'd built walls against that noise, protected herself from the madness of strangers who claimed to know her father better than she did. But lately, something had shifted inside her. Curiosity had begun gnawing at those walls, eating through her skepticism. What if there were pieces of his life she'd never known? What if he'd hidden parts of himself, even from those he loved most? The decision came one rainy October evening. She would hire someone. Not another conspiracy theorist or tabloid journalist, but a real investigator. Someone who dealt in facts and evidence, who could separate truth from fantasy. When Robert Chambers arrived at Graceland 3 weeks later, he looked nothing like Lisa Marie had imagined. She'd expected someone flashy, perhaps wearing a fedora like detectives in old films. Instead, she found a man in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, carrying a worn leather briefcase and moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd spent decades uncovering what others preferred, stayed buried. His handshake was firm but brief, his eyes observant without being invasive. "I don't make promises," he told her that first afternoon as they sat in the mansion's library. "I follow evidence wherever it leads, even if that's nowhere." Lisa Marie appreciated his honesty. She'd had enough of people telling her what they thought she wanted to hear. That first night, Robert transformed a spare room into what looked like a detective's fever dream. Charts covered the walls, connecting dates and places with red string. His desk overflowed with notebooks, old photographs, and a tape recorder that looked older than Lisa Marie herself. He'd brought boxes of her father's recordings. Not the polished studio versions everyone knew, but early takes, demos, and bootleg recordings most people had forgotten existed. She found him there past midnight, headphones covering his ears, his fingers drumming against the desk as he listened. The sight should have seemed intrusive, this stranger dissecting her father's voice in her childhood home. Instead, it felt like someone was finally taking her questions seriously. "Listen to this," Robert said when he noticed her in the doorway. He removed one side of his headphones and rewound the tape. This recording from 1963. Listen to how he emphasizes certain words, how he pauses in unusual places. Lisa Marie leaned closer, and her father's young voice filled the room. At first, she heard only the song she'd known since childhood. But as Robert replayed it, pointing out the strange patterns, the unusual repetitions of specific phrases, something prickled at the back of her neck. The way her father drew out certain syllables, the odd stress on words that disrupted the natural rhythm. It felt deliberate, purposeful. "Now listen to this one from 2 years later," Robert continued, switching tapes. Same pattern, different song, and here, he pulled out a notebook covered in his cramped handwriting. These phrases appear in 7 different recordings across 4 years. Lisa Marie sank into the chair beside him, her heart beginning to race. She thought about her childhood, the bedtime stories her father told her, the silly songs he'd make up just for her. Certain phrases in these recordings echoed those private moments, words he'd used only with her, pet names nobody else would recognize. Could it be a coincidence? She whispered, though part of her already knew the answer. Robert looked at her over his glasses, his expression unreadable. In my experience, patterns that are consistent are rarely accidental. The mansion seemed to hold its breath around them. Somewhere in another room, a clock chimed 2 in the morning. Outside, wind rustled through the trees that had stood guard over Graceland for decades. Lisa Marie felt the ghost drawing closer, as if they too wanted to hear what secrets might finally be revealed. Could he really have hidden messages in his music? She asked. Messages meant only for people who truly knew him? Decoding the King's Min. For weeks now, Robert had barely left that converted room in Graceland. Lisa Marie would bring him coffee in the mornings and find him exactly where she'd left him the night before, surrounded by papers that seemed to multiply like living things. His methodical nature fascinated her, and where she felt emotions swirling, he brought order and logic, carefully building something she couldn't yet see. One morning in November, she found him standing before the wall covered in red string, his arms crossed, head tilted as if reading a language only he understood. "I need you to look at something," he said without turning around. Lisa Marie set down the coffee and moved beside him. The wall had transformed into a web of connections, song titles linked to dates, dates linked to places, places linked to names she recognized from her childhood. These phrases, Robert pointed to a cluster of index cards pinned to the wall. They appear in recordings from different years, different albums, different producers, but they're identical, not similar, identical. Same emphasis, same unusual pronunciation, same deliberate break in the natural rhythm. He played a recording, and her father's voice filled the space. Then another from years later, then a third. Each time, buried within different melodies and arrangements, those same strange phrasings emerged like a heartbeat beneath skin. "It's like watching someone write a diary," Robert said quietly, but instead of paper, he used music. Lisa Marie felt her throat tighten. She'd grown up surrounded by her father's music, had heard these songs thousands of times. How had she never noticed? "There's more," Robert continued. He pulled out a leather-bound book from his briefcase. "The estate granted me access to some personal items. I found this yesterday." The journal looked ordinary enough, brown leather worn soft with age, pages yellowed at the edges. But when Lisa Marie opened it and saw her father's handwriting, sprawling and urgent across the pages, something inside her cracked open. These weren't tour schedules or song ideas. These were private thoughts, fears, observations about people around him. Dated entries that aligned perfectly with certain recordings Robert had been studying. Her hands trembled as she read. Her father wrote about feeling trapped, about people he couldn't trust, about saying things publicly that he couldn't speak privately. One entry from 1967 made her stomach twist. "Some truths can only be told in code," he'd written. "The walls have ears, but music has a way of hiding what needs hiding, while revealing what needs revealing. She'll understand someday, when she's old enough, when it matters." "He meant you," Robert said gently. "He was leaving breadcrumbs for you." Lisa Marie couldn't speak. She turned pages with shaking fingers, finding more entries that referenced the songs Robert had been analyzing. Her father described embedding specific phrases, certain emotional emphases that would mean something only to family, to people who knew the private man behind the public face. "There's a pattern I need to show you," Robert said, leading her to the desk where he'd laid out a timeline. "These songs that everyone thinks are simple love songs or celebratory numbers, they contain warnings." He played a recording from 1969 that had always sounded joyful to Lisa Marie's ears. But as Robert replayed it, stopping and starting, highlighting specific moments, she began to hear something else beneath the surface. The way her father's voice dropped on certain words. The tension in phrases that should have been carefree. It was like discovering a second language hidden inside the first. Now look at this journal entry from the same week he recorded that. Robert showed her a page where her father had written about feeling watched, about contracts that bound him tighter than chains, about people making decisions for him that he couldn't fight publicly. "He couldn't say these things outright," Lisa Marie whispered, understanding dawning. so he buried them in the music. Exactly, and here's where it gets interesting. Robert pulled out a chart covered in musical notations and lyrics. This sequence, 3 specific phrases that appear together in a particular order, shows up in 12 different songs spanning from 1964 to 1976. Always the same order, always the same unique delivery. It's a signature, a code. He arranged several pages before her, each containing transcribed lyrics with certain words highlighted in yellow. When she read just those highlighted words in sequence, they formed coherent sentences, instructions, warnings, messages about people by name, about situations that had seemed innocent at the time, but now revealed darker undertones. Lisa Marie felt the room spinning. She thought about family gatherings where her father would sing casually, thought about recordings she'd heard as a child, thought about all those moments when he might have been speaking directly to her future self without anyone else knowing. Could he really have done this? She asked. Could he have been this deliberate, this careful for years? Robert removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. A gesture she'd learned meant he was choosing his words carefully. I've investigated cryptographers, intelligence operatives, people trained in coded communication. Your father had no formal training, but he had something they didn't. Absolute control over his artistic expression. Every vocal choice, every emphasis, every pause was his decision. And he was brilliant, Lisa Marie. Truly brilliant. She returned to the journal, flipping through pages with new understanding. Her father had written about the burden of fame, about losing privacy, about wanting to leave truth behind for the people who mattered. One entry near the end made tears spring to her eyes. If I can't speak freely in life, he'd written, perhaps I can speak clearly through what I leave behind. The music will outlast the silence. The patterns will wait for someone who loves me enough to look. Robert gave her space, moving back to his wall of evidence. Lisa Marie stood alone with her father's journal, feeling his presence stronger than she had in years. The ghosts in Graceland's hallways suddenly seemed less like shadows and more like guardians, protecting secrets until the right moment arrived. There's one sequence that appears more than any other, Robert said after several minutes of silence. It runs through songs that span his entire career, from his earliest recordings to his last. And based on the journal entries and the specific phrases he chose, I believe this particular pattern was meant specifically for you. He showed her the sequence, played the recordings in chronological order, let the pattern reveal itself like a message emerging from invisible ink. As she listened to her father's voice weaving through decades, emphasizing words that created meaning only when pulled together, only when heard by someone who knew his private vocabulary, Lisa Marie felt something shift inside her chest. He was talking to me, she breathed. All this time, through all these years, he was talking to me. Robert nodded slowly. The question is, what was he trying to tell you? The room fell silent except for the soft whir of the tape recorder. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Graceland, darkening the Tennessee sky. Lisa Marie looked at the walls covered in her father's coded messages, at the journals filled with his unspoken truths, at the decades of music that suddenly meant something entirely new. Could her father really have hidden a message that only she could decode? And if so, what truth had been waiting all these years for her to finally understand? The daughter who risked everything for truth. December arrived at Graceland with unusual coldness. Lisa Marie noticed the change before Robert said anything. The phone calls that went silent when she entered rooms. The way certain family associates suddenly became unreachable. Then there were the cars, unfamiliar vehicles that appeared at the end of the long driveway, idling for hours before disappearing into the Memphis twilight. Robert noticed too. She found him one evening standing at the window, watching the gates with an expression she'd never seen before. Not curiosity, one concern. We're making people nervous, he said without looking at her. The deeper we dig, the more attention we attract. Lisa Marie moved beside him. A black sedan sat just beyond the property line, its windows dark and impenetrable. Who would care about this after all these years? People who had something to lose then still have something to lose now. Robert turned from the window and she saw tension in his shoulders. Your father wasn't just famous, Lisa Marie. He was connected to powerful people, witnessed things, knew secrets that could damage reputations even decades later. That night, an old business associate of her father's called. Someone she'd known since childhood, who'd sent birthday cards every year and signed them Uncle. but his voice on the phone carried none of its usual warmth. "You should let sleeping dogs lie," he told her, his words measured and careful. "Your father wouldn't want you digging into things that are better left buried. Some questions don't have good answers." After she hung up, Lisa Marie sat in the darkness of her father's old study, feeling the weight of that warning. She thought about turning back, about sending Robert away, and accepting that some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved. But then she remembered her father's journal, those desperate words about truth hidden in plain sight, about messages meant for her specifically. Robert had made progress, real, tangible progress that felt both thrilling and terrifying. He'd been working 16-hour days, barely sleeping, consuming coffee like it was oxygen. The wall in his makeshift office had evolved into something that looked like a detective's obsession. But Lisa Marie knew it was more than that. It was a map leading somewhere specific. "I need you to hear this sequence," he told her one frozen morning, his eyes bloodshot but alert. "I've been working backward from the final recordings, tracing the pattern through his entire career. It tells a story, Lisa Marie, a coherent, deliberate story. He played the songs in the order he'd arranged them, not chronologically by release date, but by the hidden sequence he'd discovered. As her father's voice flowed from track to track, spanning decades, Lisa Marie began to hear it, a narrative emerging like a photograph developing in chemicals. Her father speaking about pressure, about control, about people pulling strings and making demands he couldn't refuse. "Now watch this," Robert said, overlaying the journal entries with the song dates. Every coded message in the music corresponded to a private confession in those leather-bound pages. Together, they painted a picture of a man trapped inside his own fame, surrounded by people who saw him as property rather than human. But there was something else, a final piece that Robert had been reluctant to share. She saw it in how he hesitated, how his hand hovered over a particular envelope before pulling back. "What is it?" Lisa Marie asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Robert handed her a single page, a photocopy of a document she didn't recognize. Legal language filled the paper, dense and intimidating. But certain passages had been highlighted, and as she read them, her blood went cold. Contracts that bound her father in ways she'd never imagined. Agreements that gave others control over not just his career, but aspects of his personal life. Clauses that included consequences for speaking publicly about certain matters. He couldn't tell anyone directly, Robert explained quietly. These agreements had teeth, legal teeth, and, based on what I've found, possibly more than that. So he found another way. He embedded the truth in the one thing he controlled completely. His, artistic expression. Lisa Marie felt tears threatening, but pushed them back. She'd cried enough over the years. Right now, she needed to be strong, needed to think clearly. And the final message? "You said the pattern points to a revelation." Robert's expression grew somber. He pulled out one last chart, this one simpler than the others, just a handful of songs, spanning from her father's early career to his final recordings. The highlighted phrases, when pulled together and arranged in the order her father had embedded them, formed something that made her hands shake. "It's about you," Robert said softly. "The entire sequence, everything he encoded, it's a message to you specifically, about why he made certain choices, about what he was protecting, about what he wanted you to know when you were old enough to understand." The words swam before Lisa Marie's eyes. Her father speaking across time, telling her about the sacrifices he'd made, the deals he'd struck, the compromises forced upon him, all to protect his family, to protect her, from the machinery of fame that would have consumed them all if he hadn't offered himself as tribute. "There's more," Robert continued, and his tone made her look up sharply. "The pattern doesn't just reveal the past. It points to something specific, something tangible that your father wanted you to find." "What kind of something?" "I don't know yet, but based on the final sequence, it's hidden here, somewhere in Graceland. And I think," he paused, choosing words carefully, "I think it's evidence, proof of everything he couldn't say aloud, documentation that certain people would very much prefer stayed lost." Lisa Marie understood then why the cars had appeared, why old friends had grown nervous, why that phone call had carried an edge of threat beneath its concern. Her father hadn't just left her a message. He'd left her a choice. She could stop now, forget what they'd discovered, send Robert away, return to her life with questions unanswered but safely distant. Or she could keep going, find whatever her father had hidden, and face the consequences of bringing old secrets into the light. The wind howled outside, rattling windows that had witnessed decades of history. Lisa Marie walked to her father's desk and sat in his chair, feeling the worn leather that had conformed to his shape. She thought about the man who'd sung those coded messages, who'd spent years carefully constructing a puzzle only his daughter could solve. "Show me the final sequence again," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Robert hesitated. "Lisa Marie, if we're right about what he hid, finding it could be dangerous. The people who wanted this buried 40 years ago haven't gone away. They've just gotten older and more powerful." "I know." She met his eyes across the dim room. "But he trusted me with this. He spent his entire career leaving breadcrumbs, hoping I'd be strong enough to follow them. I can't turn back now." Robert studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He pulled out the final chart, the one that showed the ultimate pattern. The message pointed to a specific location, a particular hiding place within Graceland's many rooms. As Lisa Marie studied the sequence, committing it to memory, she felt her father's presence stronger than ever. Not the ghost that haunted hallways, but the living man who'd loved her enough to leave her the truth, no matter how difficult. "Tomorrow," she said. "We will search tomorrow." Outside, the black sedan remained at the gates, watching and waiting. But Lisa Marie had made her choice. She would follow the pattern wherever it led, would uncover what her father had hidden, would honor his trust even if it meant facing dangers she couldn't yet imagine. The question wasn't whether she'd go far enough to uncover what her father truly meant. The question was whether the truth, once found, would free her or destroy everything she thought she knew. The king's last message. The morning they found it, frost covered Graceland's windows like lace. Lisa Marie hadn't slept. Robert looked equally exhausted, his silver hair disheveled, his hands trembling slightly as he held the final decoded sequence. The pattern had led them to a specific location, a false panel in her father's private recording studio, a room she'd walked through countless times without knowing it held secrets. Robert's fingers traced the wood grain until he found the catch. The panel swung open with a whisper, revealing a space that had remained untouched for decades. Inside sat a metal box, its surface dulled by time but locked tight. "He left the key in the pattern," Robert said quietly, his voice hoarse. "The sequence of numbers embedded in those repeated phrases. It's a combination." Lisa Marie's hands shook as she turned the dial. Click, click, click. The lock surrendered, and she lifted the lid. Inside lay envelopes yellowed with age, photographs she'd never seen, and a letter addressed simply to "my daughter." Her father's handwriting covered page after page, words he'd never spoken aloud now, waiting for her eyes alone. She sat on the studio floor and began to read. Robert moved away, giving her privacy, but she called him back. "He meant for someone to help me understand," she said. "Stay." The letter began simply, her father telling her he loved her, that everything he'd done had been to protect his family from the weight of his choices. But then the tone shifted, became urgent and honest in ways she'd never heard from him. He wrote about the contracts that had bound him, about managers and handlers who'd controlled every aspect of his life. He described feeling like a prisoner inside his own fame, performing roles both on stage and off that had nothing to do with who he truly was. "I couldn't speak freely," he had written in his distinctive scrawl. "Too many people depended on the illusion. Too much money rode on maintaining the image. But I needed someone to know the truth, even if that someone was years away from understanding." He detailed specific incidents, moments when he'd tried to break free, to assert control over his own life, only to face consequences that threatened his family's security. The envelopes contained documentation, copies of contracts with clauses that shocked her, photographs showing him with people whose connections ran into shadowy territories, letters from lawyers warning him about speaking publicly on certain matters. But woven through the confession was something else. Guidance for her. Instructions on how to live with fame's legacy without letting it consume her identity. Warnings about trusting the wrong people. Advice about protecting herself and her own children from the machinery that had ground him down. "You're stronger than I was," he'd written near the end. "You have your mother's clarity and your own fierce heart. Whatever you choose to do with this truth, I trust you. That's why I left it for you. Not as a burden, but as a gift. The gift of knowing me as I truly was, not as the world demanded I be." Lisa Marie pressed the pages to her chest, tears finally breaking through. Robert remained silent, his own eyes damp behind his glasses. The photographs told stories that completed the puzzle. Her father in quiet moments, stripped of performance, looking tired and trapped. Images that would shatter the carefully constructed mythology if released to the world. But they also showed him laughing with real joy, holding her as a baby with such tenderness that her heart ached, living small, genuine moments between the spectacular fabricated ones. "What will you do?" Robert asked after she had read everything twice. Lisa Marie stood and walked to the window. Dawn was breaking over Graceland, painting the grounds in soft gold. She thought about her father's legacy, the music that had touched millions, the image that had inspired generations. Then she thought about the man who'd spent decades encoding his truth in songs, hoping his daughter would someday care enough to listen closely. "He gave me a choice," she said quietly. "He could have destroyed this evidence, could have taken these secrets to his grave. Instead, he preserved them and trusted me to decide what they meant." She turned to Robert, clarity settling over her like peace. The world doesn't need to see these contracts or photographs. They don't need to know every detail of what he endured, but they deserve to understand that his music meant more than entertainment. That if you listen carefully, really listen, you can hear a man speaking his truth the only way he could. Robert nodded slowly. "And the documentation? Stays safe, stays private. Some truths are meant for family alone." Lisa Marie gathered the papers carefully, feeling their weight. "But I'll make sure people know to listen differently, to hear the layers beneath the surface. He spent his life creating a puzzle for those who loved him enough to solve it. That's the story worth telling." She looked at the decoded patterns covering Robert's walls, at months of work that had led to this moment. Her father's voice suddenly felt alive again, not haunting but present, speaking through the music he'd so carefully constructed. "Will anyone ever truly understand?" Robert asked, echoing the question that had driven their entire investigation. Lisa Marie smiled sadly, thinking of the hidden messages that had waited decades to be found, of the love that had motivated such elaborate secrecy, of the trust her father had placed in her future self. "Those who need to understand will," she said. "That's enough." Outside, Graceland stood silent and dignified, its walls holding countless secrets. But Lisa Marie no longer felt haunted by what remained unknown. She'd found what her father wanted her to find. Not just evidence of his struggles, but proof of his faith in her strength, his confidence in her judgment, his belief that she would honor both the man and the legend without destroying either. The music would continue playing. People would keep listening. And somewhere in those recordings, coded messages would wait for careful ears, speaking truths that only love could decode.